Colleagues, let's get seated and get ready to start. I would invite the panelists to sit in front here. So, should get started. Are there colleagues still having their coffee out there? Can you rush them in? And when they come in, let them sit in the front so that they get penalized for coming late. So, so ladies and gentlemen, this is a great privilege and honor for me to be here for the launch of this momentous book on electricity access in Africa. What I'm going to do is to very quickly give few opening remarks, and I will invite my colleague Musa to come and tell us a little bit more about the book. We will follow with a panel with 4 eminent speakers, and we have one panelist online. I think we are working to make sure the panelist is connected from Nigeria, and we'll have an open discussion afterward. So let me, colleagues, start by saying that 3 years ago when I started this job as chief economist for the Africa region, and by the way, my name is Albert Zufak. When I started this job a little bit more than 3 years ago, one of the questions that were on our mind was why electricity access is so low in Africa. I visited, as manager, before that, I visited Burundi, one of the countries in Africa where electricity access was less than 10%. So 1 out of 10 people in Burundi clearly didn't have access to electricity. Yet we were spending a lot of money on private sector development in the bank. We were pushing for all kinds of policy measures that would, promote manufacturing, promote all kinds of activities. Yet the focus on electricity wasn't clearly as important as it should have been. So when I moved to this job as chief economist, one thing that really struck my attention was the fact that the vice president then, Mactar Diop, had really asked the chief economist office to look at the question of electricity access, but from a very, very different perspective. Instead of the typical supply side issues that have to be addressed, he pushed the team to really be thinking out of the box to focus on the demand side of electricity access. He pushed the team to really start understanding what actually determines uptake. Because it did happen that in some countries when we had made a lot of efforts in getting electricity or getting electricity to be accessible, connections did not follow. So the issue of the uptake came up extremely clear as one of the things we should be addressing, as well as pushing the effort to provide for generation capacity. So my colleague Musa and Malcolm here were tasked to really bring this project together. So it's a strong collaboration between the Chief Economist Office and the Energy Global Practice that has led to this wonderful book that we are launching today. Now, let me first say what this book is not about. This book is not about whether electricity is important or not for Africa. It is not about if electricity is needed or not for the poor. It is not about showcasing the worst situation in Sub-Saharan Africa or emphasizing how little has been achieved. This last point is important. We need to look at it, but we need to very quickly focus on what needs to be done to address the issue and how to do it. And how is important because this book is about how to rethink electrification efforts by the World Bank, but also the global development community. How do we rethink it and how to do it well and fast? To me, that's extremely important. And I would like us during this book launch to have a conversation. This is not a lecture. It's not going to be a lecture. I know Professor Blimpo likes to lecture. But I would want him to share with us in 20 minutes maximum some of the highlights of the book. And I can tell you the findings of the books are already having quite a significant impact. And let me share with you how I really enjoy working with the team leading to this project. I did enjoy it because the process followed by this report is exactly the way I like working on regional flagship studies. You start by commissioning and working on a set of background papers, technical background papers, that push the boundaries of knowledge, that generate new knowledge for Africa, because that's certainly one of the areas that is in serious lack. Generating that cutting-edge knowledge on Africa is certainly something we need to do. We need to take any opportunity to do. So you generate that set of background papers, technical, that are so strong that they can be publishable on their own right, and therefore already start impacting the research community. And then pool the knowledge from all these papers in the second phase to write a policy-relevant report. This is what this team has done. And this report, this book you are seeing here, we're launching today, is the fruit of that second stage of work where they have pulled together extremely high quality technical work, but they wrote it in a way that it can be useful to the African policymakers and to you practitioners of development interested in solving the issues of electricity access in Africa. So it's been a pleasure for me working with the team. And I would like you to join me in congratulating the team, the large team that pulled together this report, and which is represented here by Musa Blimpo and his co-author, Malcolm Groves. Can you please rise, the two of you, and please let's join me in. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be asking my colleague, Musa Blimpo, on behalf of the team, in 20 minutes to give us an overview of the book. Thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, thank you very much for coming, and Albert, thank you for the introduction. I would like to acknowledge my co-author who has now retired from the bank, but took some time off the fund to for the good cause, I would say. Thanks for being here with me today. And Albert has also mentioned the fact that there is a large team behind this work. I'd like to recognize all the researchers who've worked on this over the past many years to bring the knowledge that we needed together for the report, as well as all the research assistance that we've received from a lot of people that I will not have enough time to list all here. So let me start by repeating a little bit of what Albert has said, which is that in reality, we are not here to discuss whether electricity is important or not. We certainly not in an era, it's just obvious in this era where most modern economic activities will require this type of energy. But one aspect that we want to highlight, though, is that electricity has something that is a little bit special, in that it is a general purpose technology. Right. And what general purpose technologies have a few characteristics, two of which that I would like to draw your attention on. These are technologies that have the potential and that would affect all the sectors of the economy and potentially transform nearly all of them. There's been also documentation in the literature showing that these general purpose technology tend to have this characteristic whereby, in fact, sometime when they come about, you will see initially productivity even going down first before it shoot up again later, right? And what I'm showing you here is looking at total factor productivity in the United States at a different stage of electrification, and you will see that for nearly 40 years, productivity has picked up very little until at some point when we saw much more increase in productivity. The same debate has gone on with information technologies, right? There is a famous quote attributed to Bob Solow in the late 80s, whereby he says that, we see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics, right? And yet, we will not today deny the importance of information technologies in areas that we will not necessarily have imagined that those are the areas where we will see the impact. So for general purpose technology then, what does that mean? Why did I need to say this? I need to say this because for this type of technologies, when the resources are available, you want to spread them out, and you want to spread them out fast if you do not have the resource constraints, right? We are not very good at predicting, do A and then B is going to happen, do X in village A and Y is going to happen. In fact, we're not even very good at explaining after the fact. So for this type of technologies, it's better once you don't have resource constraints to try to spread them out as much as you can. And this is the example of Vietnam. The red line on top is electricity access in rural areas, in urban areas. By the 90s already, it was universal access, and then they've decided at some point that we need to push it to the final line, and the other curve that are upward slope, with the upward slope, is the rural electrification in 20 years. They've decided to close the gap. Now, what they have done is part of the discussions that we're having in this book. This strategy, what is the best way to do it in these circumstances? In most African countries, though, the resources are not going to be there to just decide that I'm going to put electricity everywhere tomorrow and then plan and just roll it out. In our office, we talk a lot about debt sustainability already, right? So the public resources are not there to be able to do this, right? One example here is Ghana, that has made the decision to make a lot of progress on electrification, and we highlight this example in the book. But there are many other examples around the world where a lot of time it is governments that really take the lead and make things happen. And one example of that is when last year the Indian government made the announcement that they've now connected all the villages in India. Right. The issue there is not how many households are connected in India. The importance there is that in any of these communities now, there is a wide range of economic activities that were once not possible because of electricity. That is now possible. But because these activities are possible now, that doesn't also mean that they are going to happen just tomorrow, because electricity is not the only things that you need. But India can then move on to start thinking about what else is needed. Right? So Under resource constraints in African countries, the options we can think of is maybe the private sector will come in, right? But the kind of financing that you need, remember general purpose technologies, take long time before you see the productivity gains for it. So the kind of financing that you will need is a very long-term private financing. Financing that will go and financing that will not have profit in the short term, not even in the medium term sometime. Right. So it may be unlikely in some cases that you will be able to get that kind of finances to electrify rural villages in Africa. If it's aid, it's not the kind of aid we are having right now that's going to cut it. You need, in some cases, Marshall Plan type aid to just solve these infrastructure issues and then move on to something else, right? But short of that, it just looks like progress is going to happen. It's going to be maybe slower, but it's going to be incremental, right? But if progress is going to be incremental, how do we make it faster? And how do we do it in a way that is financially sustainable? Because resource constraint is the issue. And that's where we spend a lot of time in the book, spend a lot of time in the book reflecting on, right? And by the way, there is a discount on the book on your way, a 20% discount, I was told. But you can also get it free online on the World Bank website. So let me start by asking you, if we said, just like the Sustainable Development Goal has stated, that we want to have all households, and here I'm being even modest by saying greater number of households gain access and consume also, right? I mean, we want them to consume. If you have access and you're not using it, what's the point, right? And also the prices must be affordable, right? You don't want people to pull kids out of school so that they can pay for electricity. You know, there's a resource constraint. So this is a goal that we want. People to have access, to be able to use it at a price that is affordable. So seems like that makes sense. But we also want utilities to be able to provide reliable service and that they have a sustainable balance sheet, right? That is also desirable. Otherwise, it's not going to be reliable. You're going to have a lot of problems with in the sector. And the problem that we've identified when we start looking at these issues at the beginning is that there was a lot of emphasis on the supply side of this equation and much less on the demand-related issues, right? And there was disconnect between these issues. So you talk about the household access in the morning, everyone agrees, we need more people to be connected. And then you talk about the utilities financial stress in the afternoon, and everyone agree we need to make the utilities financially sustainable. But unless you bring these two things together on the same table and realize that sometime trying to get more households connected, the kind of policies that you are promoting are having negative effect on the utility side and vice versa. Unless you bring this to the same equation, then you don't see what the issue is really. And that's what we try to do, right? And when you don't bring these two issues together, what you're going to get is the state of electrification that we have right now in Africa. Fewer households connected, despite the fact that we are all pushing to get more households to be connected. Consumption level very low, which beg the question, what is the point of this? And reliability issues on the other side. The utilities, so we get the worst of both worlds, just because we're not necessarily bringing these issues together. And that's some of the effort that we're trying to do. And when you start thinking about this, clearly the demand side issues are going to pop up as prominent, right? And we are showing we're using three data sources here to show you how in many African countries where there is already electricity covered, where people can connect, a lot of time it's less than 50% of the households in those areas who are connected. It is available, but uptake is relatively low, right? And so what we are doing in the rest of the book is to try to address this issue. Okay, there is still a commitment. There is a commitment to the Sustainable Development Goal of having everyone have reliable electricity by 2030. We're working in the backdrop of that commitment that all countries and international community has signed up to. But when we start looking at these issues, then we see two routes in the book through which we can make progress in addressing this issue. The first route is basically to try to solve the problem. Households aren't connected. Let's go figure out what is the problem that is not making them connect, so that we can maybe get more uptake and get a larger number of electricity access in Africa. This graph here is showing us the willingness to pay for electricity connection in Liberia. We have similar graph in the book for other countries, right? When you go and propose it for free to household, you get numbers that are close to 100%. But when you propose just to pay $10 to get connected, that number dropped already to 60% only. Right. Now, our analysis shows to us this is not a reflection of people's desire for electricity. That's not an issue. The issue is the affordability. Right? There is an opportunity cost to putting that $10 in order to get electricity in your house, and that opportunity cost may be too high for most of our households. So what do? We ask utilities, cut the cost, make it easy for the household to, try to get it as low as you can. We've done some simulation here, inspired from a blog that Todd that we pick up on Todd's website at some point for many countries. Just saying, what is the share of GDP will take in African countries to power one average fridge for 1 year, right? You power a fridge continuously, right? That also makes sense. And in a country like my own in Togo, is 20% of the GDP, right? And of course, this does not include 20% of the GDP per capita. This does not include the cost of the fridge to start with, right? So you look at these numbers and you run some simple simulation, it just doesn't add up. The math doesn't add up in this process of just trying to connect more households, right? You go look at connection charges, you see that they are too high. And then what do we say? Cut the connection charges lower so that we can connect more households, right? But again, why are they high in the first place? These are some of the questions we are. If you are a utility, you want to have customers. So why are you setting the connection criteria such in a way that it's not realistic for customers to come in, right? So just telling utilities to make it easier, we call that targeting these symptoms, right? But we do show, though, that removing these barriers are going to get you a little more connections and more households. We see that household income irregularity matters for the bill, the commitment to sign up for a service for which you have to pay a monthly bill, whereas your income is not a monthly income like most of us here, right? So what is the solution to that? Prepaid meter. So I give you a prepaid meter, you are connected to electricity, you are going to have electricity when you have money, and you don't have electricity when you don't have money. So this is really fighting the symptoms, the manifestation of something else, in our view, in the book. So this first route, if you target these symptoms, so that's what is being done. We have prepaid meters, we have payment facilities allowing customers to pay over a long period of time the initial cost that they could otherwise not afford. These are the solutions. It will increase access numbers, and that's what we do have in the book. But unless you go back and think about these issues that I've highlighted in the beginning, that we want it to be also financially sustainable. Otherwise, there is the outcome is the current state that we have, which doesn't look good. Then you will realize that even by getting more access, then we're going to be having these financial stress of the utilities exacerbated. We have another study prior to this study that has shown that out of, I believe, 33 countries that they've looked at very carefully in Sub-Saharan Africa, only two, I think, Uganda and Mauritius, were financially viable, the utilities. So they're losing money. And this simulation is also speaking to that. And the very realistic assumptions, assuming the average consumption to be where it is right now, assuming other factors to be where they are right now, for most countries, basically adding one more customer will make them lose money, not gain money. Right. So unless you are a public sector company where the government just make a law and force you to connect household, it wouldn't make sense if you are a private sector to be looking for these for these customers, right? So flexible payment schemes, lowering connection charges, prepaid meters, ready boards when the housing conditions do not meet the statutory requirement to connect, come up with ready boards so that maybe you can still connect them anyway, despite the fact that the housing is would appear even to be the primary concern of such household. It's not. It may increase the numbers for the continent, but it may not necessarily be the solution that is desired. Then we look at the second route. In the second route, what we ask ourselves is just to step back and say, why are we doing this in the first place? Why are we doing electrification? Are we doing electrification so that we can say people are connected? Yeah, we have a lot of electricity around. No, we are actually doing that so that people will live better lives, so that people will generate income, so that people will have jobs, so that the economy will grow, so that society will transform as a result of that economic activities. And when you pose the question that way, then it leads you inevitably to think more carefully about the productive use side of electrification. And that's what we explore also deeply in the book. When households gain access to electricity, that electricity contribute to raising their income, yes, then they'll be able to pay more and maybe consume even more over time. And that will also contribute to dealing with the financial situation of the utility. But of course, that may mean lower progress on the numbers, right? That may mean that we are less fast in getting more household connected. But if you look at all the examples that I've shown you around the world, be it in the United States or Vietnam that I've shown earlier, the last mile, the rural electrification, sometimes kind of lag a little bit, and that may be speaking also to this issue of trying to make sure that electrification contribute to transforming the economy and to creating jobs, and so that the feedback loop will work in a way that that will create sustainability, and I'm talking about financial sustainability here. But to do productive use, we argue that you need two things. You need to focus on getting reliability. Wherever you have electricity, you need to be reliable. And there are like serious reliability issues on the continent. You also need to think about complementary factors. There's no one in their right mind who would think that electricity is all you need. Electricity is an input that always requires other input for economic activities to take place. And these are the areas where we need much more knowledge and guidance to our government so that they can make the right decision in the rollout and their electrification efforts. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip two slides. These slides are just showing you our documentation in the book about what lack of reliability is costing to our continent in terms of economic activity, in terms of jobs. And this one here is speaking to competitiveness. When you start looking at the share of firms who are able to export, right? You will not be competitive in situations where electricity is going off every other day. We even show in the book how, with some simple simulation, how the lost revenue to the government is relatively high. By just fixing the reliability issue, the added revenue to firm, and then you try to look at what would that imply in terms of tax revenue to the government. It's a significant amount, which may even justify sometimes the upfront financing, right? We even show that it also matters even in the way the citizens view their government. And this graph here is showing you that the more reliable electricity is, the higher the tax moral in African countries, and this is data covering 31 different African countries. So people's willingness to accept that taxing me is legitimate, I'm willing to pay taxes, this is my part of the contribution to our development, it matters for the quality of the service. We are not talking about just access, right? Then to finish, like I've said before, you will think that electricity will require other things for sure for economic activity to happen. That's where we need more knowledge that could either help us plan about where to bring it first, in the electrification planning, or to think about what package to put together as you are thinking about electrification going forward. And this is what is also going to create that feedback loop that I was talking about earlier. But here we need more knowledge, more research is needed in this area, and we are short on research for this. We usually have research that says, what is the impact of electricity? And then either they find positive or negative or big or small, but that's not very helpful. What we really need to know more of is under what condition the impact is likely to be larger. What are the other complementary factors that are needed for impact to be larger? And we spend a little bit of time using data from Rwanda here, and we could do this exercise for other parts. And this was some of the early data that was available. And the top panel of the graph is showing you the impact of reliable electricity on non-farm employment. Now, remember, I've talked about the importance of reliability already. So when we are doing this analysis, we're no longer looking at electricity. We restrict to only where there is reliable electricity. And we see that the impact on non-farm job is going to rise with the extent of access to market. And access to market here is not just road. Yes, it's a combination of road, but also how far is a larger city where people live and who will buy things from you. So we have built some indices and try to look in that. Similarly, skill is going to matter. If your objective is, in particular in the case of Rwanda, where we are using this data and we are not claiming any external validity because we think this exercise should be done in a context-specific way to help government make the right decision. But in this particular case, skills and access to market is going to matter when electricity is coming for a non-farm job to appear, which we assume to be perhaps more productive jobs than many agricultural production right now. But when we look at income only, not formal jobs, because as you will know, there is a large stock of adults in Africa who may not have the adequate skills and all that, but they are all engaged in all sort of economic activity. So when we look at income only, their skill didn't really matter, but access to credit in addition to market seemed to be a gradient that was much more important. So to finish, these two routes, like I've discussed before, if the ultimate goal is really economic activity, jobs, and transforming lives, we think productive use need to be center stage, and we ought to think careful about how we design policies going forward. But if the goal is just looking at how many people get access to electricity, then that requires a lot of financing that may not justify for itself. That may not meet. That may not necessarily yield the impact that's needed in the short term. But again, this is the two routes that we've explored carefully in the book. And this is what I had for you today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I hope I haven't gone too much over time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Musa. And let me now call on the stage our panel. And we have assembled an excellent panel here, starting with Dr. Professor Musa Blimpo. As I said earlier, We are extremely lucky in the Office of the Chief Economist of the Africa region to have Musa, who came from academia indeed. And Musa is a senior economist in the Chief Economist Office here in the Africa region, and has widely published, and he's clearly a star. And this book is certainly making him even more of a star already, and I'm extremely proud to be working with him. He, apart from academia, has actually been extremely active in the civil society. He has actually founded a think tank in Togo that works in the area of research and opinion polls. And he's clearly, from a distance, influencing political and economic life in his own country. So thank you very, very much for Musa, and I would probably want to ask you to applaud him one more time for a brilliant presentation. Now let me move to the other panel members, and I'll start with the ladies first. So Vivienne Foster is the chief economist of the Infrastructure Practice Group at the World Bank. She needs no introduction within the World Bank, but for those of you who are not from the bank, you should know she has held a lot of important roles in the bank, including sector manager, practice manager, which happens to be one of the most difficult jobs in the bank, and she survived. So me too. so Vivienne has done extremely influential work, and she's been working in global tracking framework and readiness for investment in sustainable energy, among many other things. Can I invite Vivienne to come to the floor? Rose Mutiso is the research director for the Energy for Growth Hub and the co-founder and CEO of the Mawazo Institute, which supports the next generation of female scholars and thought leaders in East Africa. Please help me welcoming Rose on the please. Thotmos needs no introduction, neither in the bank nor outside. Todd is, a brilliant academic. Todd is, a wonderful scholar who has actually contributed to this literature, in immense way. And some of the ideas developed in this book are actually clearly, following his footsteps and his great research in this area. Todd is currently the executive director of the Energy for Growth Hub, a spin-off of the Center for Global Development, where he is a visiting fellow. And, Todd has been working extensively in the U.S. development finance and U.S.-Africa relationship for a while. He's also a non-resident scholar at the Center for Energy Studies at Rice University. Welcome, Todd. Last but not least, and I hope we have him online, and I ended with Mr. Musiliu Olalekan Oseni, who is online joining us from Nigeria. He's a regulator, and I would actually want us to start listening from Mr. Oseni, as it's getting late in Lagos. It's getting late. It's in Abuja. He's in Abuja. It's getting late in Nigeria for sure. And it's also Ramadan, and we're really grateful he has agreed to speak to us, during this Ramadan period. So, Mr. Oseni, Ramadan Karim, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So let me just get you started. You've heard Musa discussing the findings of this book. You've read it, and you've clearly underscored the role the government, and especially the role of regulators, in providing electrification in Africa. You certainly, as a regulator, understand exactly when we discuss the need to balance the desire to provide electricity for all, but also to have well-functioning and financially sustainable utilities. So my question to you is, can you probably very, very quickly give us some sense of your view from your own background, your hands-on experience in Nigeria, and what are the challenges that you face, and how you can advise other regulator in addressing better these challenges. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on this great occasion. Indeed glad to be part of the discussion. And let me start by, first and foremost, congratulate the authors of the book. It's a well-written book. It's a book that has addressed a lot of issues regarding electrification in Africa. So I will say big congratulations to the author of the book. Yeah. Looking at the question about the role or roles of the regulator and government, I'm going to say that the regulator really has a big role to play when it comes to electrification, not only in Africa, but in all parts of the world. Because I believe that the regulator has the cake and also holds the knife. So, and there are some conflicting interests because the consumers, one side, want to have either connect to electricity, consume electricity without necessarily want to pay for the electricity services. That's why they normally say that no price is too low for consumers, because consumers only want as low price as possible. Meanwhile, on the other side, to guarantee quality of supply, which is about the reliability, and at the same time to guarantee the security of supply, the financial sustainability, as highlighted in the books by Professor Musa and his colleague, actually come into play. Because without sustainability, it means that the sector cannot survive. So the regulator will have to be there to make sure the interest of the investors is protected, while at the same time trying to balance the interest of the consumers. Unfortunately, the two groups, they have conflicting interests. The consumers will want low prices, while investors will want as high as possible to charge, because that is we make them financially well off. So my experience in Nigeria, for instance, and I think is applicable to all African countries on this issue, is that it's been a very serious challenge for us. For instance, in Nigeria, currently we have commercial issues, which is liquidity crisis in the industry. And it's as a result of the prices being charged. That the utilities are allowed to charge is around 60% of their cost recovery. Cost effective, you have about 40% left unrecovered, or which the utilities are not allowed to charge. Of course, people may argue that if subsidies are available from the government, it means that the utilities are made whole. But one question is one issue, what especially in Nigeria, if it is going to be applied, the subsidy is not immediately on the table. So when you listen to these presentations and you argue or you try to question them about poor quality of supply, they will say because I don't have cost reflective tariff, I can't approach friendships for the my business. On the other hand, when you look at it and you want to try as much as possible to put the tariff at the point it's supposed to be, again, the issue of the affordability will come in, because you also have to look at the affordability issue. How affordable is the tariff? If you want to charge, let's say, 25 cents, 20 cents, or 80 cents, look at the salary of people in the country, the country at the same time, and you want to balance the treasury. Of course, regulate that issue is both the regulator and the policy makers. But the issue of this some more some issues that have been faced in Africa, and
So also have our internet access problems, and interestingly, the two are intrinsically linked. And from Musa's presentation, you probably understood that the one-handed economies wouldn't solve this kind of problems, right? We need both the supply and the demand to be on the table and actually discuss that quite in tandem. So I will switch to our second speaker. I would ask Vivian to go next. Vivian, one of the most important recommendations of this report, as we have heard, is the need for complementary factors, right? Either those factors should target areas, where conditions are enabling, or providing electricity bundled with other complementary factors, right? Bring this together. So, at the operations side, the bank has the tool to approach this issue, as stated here. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, what are, what would these efforts look like from where you sit?
Certainly, Albert, thanks very much. And I agree that the complementary factors are really one of the critical messages of the book. I'd like to distinguish between two strategies that you mentioned. One is bundling and the other is targeting. So one approach is to say, let's actually provide all these different services that we need simultaneously together: the skills, the credit, the energy, the access to markets. And another is to target the electricity where those other things may already be present, right? So I think the bundling, to me, poses much more severe challenges than the targeting. I think if we go back several decades, we might find that the bank, maybe back in the 80s, was working on these, Christmas tree projects on rural development, where we tried to provide all kinds of different services simultaneously, and maybe Matt can tell us a bit more about that. But my understanding is that this approach was actually dropped because the implementation was very, very complex. There were too many counterparts, too many partners, too many different kinds of things needing to be coordinated. And so we've tended to move towards more focused interventions. But that doesn't, I don't think bundling is the only solution. I think the government perhaps could contribute here by doing, as it were, cross-sectoral territorial planning. I don't think we see enough of that. We see a planning deficit in Africa in general, even at the single sector level. Mm-hmm. But what you would really need to achieve some of these complementary effects is to have the government thinking territorially about their planning and coordinating activities of different donors, maybe of the different partners that they have, of their own investment program, around a more spatial lens. So I think that is something that I think is still some way ahead, but would ideally be needed to meet this kind of factor. Where I think we're doing a lot better, though, is on the targeting. And we are, really fortunate because we're now living in an era where geospatial tools have really gone through an enormous progress, both in terms of the software that we have at our disposal, but also the availability of data. And this is really an area where the energy practice, I think, has really mainstreamed geospatial planning. I think it just about many of the countries where we're engaged, spatial electrification master planning has become almost the standard. We need it in particular because we're concerned to try and trace the boundary between grid electrification and off-grid electrification. That's, if you like, the first application to which it has been put, and that's often based on population densities. I think where we can push the envelope on spatial planning for electrification is in bringing in more and more layers of data that enable us then to get this cross-sectoral kind of approach, and then maybe targeting our electrification interventions to the places where some of these other constraints have already been eased, and therefore we know that we're going to get a higher bang for the buck. Thank you.
Well, as I have you, maybe let me follow up on, on another point. A couple of years ago, I don't want to say when exactly, because it was a little bit, a while back, but, just a couple of years ago, you raised this, issue of, of financing gap in infrastructure.
Yes.
Right? You were then doing this interesting work on African infrastructure country diagnostics. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit more about how countries can relocate existing spending to subsectors in need? Mm-hmm. How do we concretely close that financing gap in the energy sector?
Okay, well, I think that's a very important question. And to be full disclosure, this was about 10 years ago, I believe, that we worked on this issue. And at that point, what we learned was that although Africa had a huge infrastructure financing gap, roughly a third of it could be filled by various measures targeted at improving efficiency, right? And we went into some depth about what these different efficiency gains, where they could come from. And I think if we turn that attention to electrification, I think we can see many ways in which the financing gap could be covered. So one aspect, and I'm now referring to a more recent report actually that came out that Marianne Fay and colleagues published a couple of months ago. It's called Beyond the Gap, and it's very much the same philosophy, right? It's saying it's not just a financing gap, it's how you do it. So one of the issues is for electrification is the technology choice. What level of service do you actually want to provide? Do you want to go all the way to, the energy practice has developed this very interesting multi-tier framework that sets different qualities of access to electrification. So if you want to go all the way to tier 5, 24/7 grid electrification with, for supporting a full range of productive applications, that has one price tag attached. If you want to go more for a basic service, maybe using solar technologies, then that has a different price tag. So clearly where you pitch the level of service and the standard that you're aiming for will determine how big your financing gap is. Now we can have, and I'm sure will have a discussion about what is correct. What should we really aim for? Is it enough to give very basic level, or do we really need those higher tiers? But I'll leave that for another moment. But that technology choice and quality of service is clearly one way of closing the gap. I think another issue is how are you allocating the scarce public funds that you have available? Are you, so to speak, wasting public funds on investments that could easily be provided by the private sector, or are you really deploying them where there's a clear public good, deficiency? We also, in the power sector, I think, have the issue of cost recovery as being another major issue. And our colleague, the regulator, began to talk about some of the struggles of reaching cost recovery pricing. But we have to ask ourselves, is it more important to have subsidized use and then have an enormous connection charge? Or does it make more sense to subsidize the connection charge and then have a real tariff for use of service? And I think that's, a genuine debate that we need to have. Sure. And then finally, there's efficiency, right? Efficiency is a huge issue in the electricity sector in Africa, and it occurs really along the supply chain. So we find a lot of countries are paying over the odds for power generation. Often they're building the wrong kinds of technologies. They're doing it through, non-transparent, directly negotiated deals. So they're paying really a premium for generation. But also we know there's a huge loss in terms of efficiency on the distribution network. Mm-hmm. So I think those are some of the ways in which the funding gap needs to be closed, and no single one is large enough to tackle the problem, clearly. Absolutely.
Well, let me probably just rebound quickly on the point you made on multi-tiering. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very useful way to look at the gap. Mm-hmm. But where I'm actually worried is researchers, building on that multi-tiering of energy to actually recommend that, recommend use to some level of income, because then that could be dangerous in terms of completely leaving out the poor of the electricity market, or believing that the lowest income deserve the cheapest and low quality solar lamp as the only way to access electricity. I think that could be dangerous, actually. But anyway, as you said, that's the topic of another discussion.
Right,
Let me move to Todd. Todd, you might be smiling listening to us, right? You are an energy expert, and thank God you don't work for the bank, right? So you may actually think differently. You may be, you may have completely different views. Point blank, what do you think about this book, and what is new here?
So it's getting to 5 o'clock, so it would be really boring if we just all agreed and I said everything was wonderful. So I will try to be a little bit provocative. But let me start by just really congratulating Musa. I've read about 2/3 of the book so far, and it's really an excellent contribution, and really empirical evidence that you've provided is so needed for a lot of these debates. So I congratulate you. Before I get to what I really love, I'll tell you what I really don't love about the energy policy debates that we're all a part of. And it starts.
Oops. Can you use the mic, please?
So, is this on? Is this okay? It starts with our favorite sustainable development goals. And SDG 7 is modern energy access for all. That is a wonderful goal. Who wouldn't be in favor of that? The problem is how we're measuring it. The meaningful metric, there's a cooking metric and a renewable energy metric, but the main metric, how we are judging modern energy for everyone on the planet, is the residential access rate, the residential connection rate. Now, residential electricity accounts for 5% of global energy consumption. So modern energy for all, we are measuring by a tiny, tiny fraction of what it means to have modern energy for all. It gets worse because the metric is using the IEA standard, which for a rural person living in Ethiopia or Nigeria is 50 kilowatt hours per person per year. Now, an average American will use that in less than 3 days. And this super low bar, which is targeted just at residential electricity, not at the whole energy system, has real negative implications, or some potentially problematic implications that I think Albert was hinting at. One is this notion that I hear all the time, especially from Silicon Valley firms, that they can come up with a small off-grid solution that will solve Africa's energy problem. But again, they're solving just a tiny niche of that. And even the US government, which Rose had worked on, is also prone to this problem. Power Africa, which is the US government initiative to promote electrification, wonderful initiative. I'm a tremendous, tremendous supporter of Power Africa. But one of its two goals is 20 million connections by 2030. In the first 3 years, the connections that Power Africa is delivering are solar lantern deliveries. Now, that is not what we would think of as a connection. So we've really, really set the bar. We picked a narrow niche, and we've set the bar just ridiculously low. And again, a lot of this comes to the way that people think about energy poverty. We immediately think of lights. The IFC also kind of a little bit vulnerable to this. We immediately think of lights. Lighting is just so small. It's almost irrelevant to a modern energy system. We should be thinking about air conditioning. We should be thinking about industry. And if we're thinking, we look at African economies, which are going to be largely services dominated, even if we think they're not going to be heavy industry like Europe and Asia, it's going to be services. What is the lifeblood of the services economy? Data centers. And data centers need cooling, and they have to run on cheap energy, and they cannot stop. It has to run all the time. which gets me to what I love about Musa and Malcolm's book, which is the focus on productive uses and the focus on reliability. That is, I think, the real strength here and where they can have a real impact on how people think about this. Maybe I haven't gotten to this part yet. The one bit I would hope that there was more emphasis would be on cost. And cost matters a lot, especially if you want to export, especially if you want to be globally competitive. And that's where the World Bank, I think, can be critically important, which is helping countries figure out what are those least cost options, not just the sexiest options, not just the option that's going to get the president, on some big stage to feel good. And in some countries like Nigeria, that is going to mean gas. So I sure hope that the World Bank is going to continue to stand for stand for least cost options for the low income and developing markets where they need to. Thank you.
Well said, Todd. I completely share that point. It's not just about the sexiest option or the one that is the most, acceptable to some NGOs or some, groups. It's the least cost option that would lead to productive use. And I think that's essential. The Africa region just adopted a new strategy and promoting or working with countries to harness the digital revolution is at the core of that strategy. But we won't be able to make a dent if there is no proper electricity. And that proper electricity would not come from that just solar lamp that you mentioned. So yes, of course, we are all for all options, but it's important to really emphasize that need for Africa, if not to industrialize, at least to use energy for productive use. Completely agree. Now, to you, Rose. You've heard a lot of provocative statements that may go against what you've done. So, you've certainly worked on climate change issues for a while, and you've worked with the U.S. government. We didn't say anything wrong about the government, okay? So, but there is certainly the need for higher energy consumption in Africa, right? And depending on the source, this may have implications on climate change. So, what's your view, and how do we balance the need to, ramp up consumption in energy and climate change?
So yes, thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be back. I'm now based in Kenya, so I've shifted to Kenyan issues. So whatever is happening with the U.S. government, I'm not responsible. This is interesting. So Todd and I work together really closely, and we have like a good cop, bad cop routine that we take on the road. I'll let you decide which one is more controversial than the other. I'm sure you all hear this all the time, the whole climate versus growth debate, and it keeps going around and has kind of pushed people in this polarized positions. And so I try to reject that kind of antagonistic framing, that it's one or the other. There are obviously trade-offs, there are decisions to be made. These decisions are context-specific. And so I think that I usually I get asked this question a lot, and my starting point is often just to kind of, remove the conversation from that really kind of volatile frame. And, with some examples, in a country like Kenya and in a lot of Africa, taking out Southern Africa and North Africa, most of our power is already really, really green. In Kenya, we're at almost 50% geothermal. The rest is hydro. We have a little bit of diesel. We have abundant solar and wind. And so it's a little bit of a non-issue in many parts of Africa. Of course, then climate comes in. Actually, I think the big climate consideration for Africa is not how we grow. I mean, for Eastern Africa, definitely, our region is not how we grow and not pollute, but it's actually how do we deal with climate vulnerability given the share of hydro we have. And so climate change, discussions of climate change have a lot of texture, and it's not just this, we're often pigeonholed into this reactive, how can we grow and still not pollute? And I think this puts African politicians in a very defensive pose. you know, because they're just, you know, they feel like, where is the West telling us not to do things? You know what? I'm going to build a coal plant in coastal Kenya. We don't need it. But, then, it just creates, I think, a lot of unnecessary and tension and reactive interventions. And so I do think that there has to be growth in consumption. There will be climate impact of this. This impact will look different in different parts of Africa. Overall, Africa is a very, very small piece of the GHG puzzle, and I think it's a little bit of a distraction to keep for that to continue with this antagonistic frame to grow or not to grow, to pollute or not to pollute. Very good.
I'm sure there are a number of people in the room that may disagree with that position. We will certainly hear from them, I hope. And, this is certainly the right time for me to open the floor for comments, questions, clarification. But the first thing you need to do is to read this book. And I can tell you it's worth doing. It's worth reading. And I personally have learned, tremendously. And, working with the colleagues in energy, in the bank, and really coming down to those points Musa has so clearly, elaborated. Hasn't been easy. It's been a lot of interactions and discussions within the bank itself because, we are all looking for the right solution for Africa. So with this, let me open the floor. Please keep your question very short, and if you want to direct your question to a specific person, please name the person, and if it's for all panelists, please say it, but let's keep it clear and succinct. Do we have mics in the room? Please, can you come to the mic? Introduce yourself and keep your question really short. Thank you. I will take a number of them, and then we will answer on the panel. Please.
Hi, thanks to the panelists. My name is Fidel Ode. I work for the bank. I'm directing my question to Vivian. I haven't read the book, unfortunately. I came in just at the time that Vivian was talking about gaps in closing infrastructure gaps in Africa. And one of the points she made is something that has been dominating development discussion among very talented, development practitioners for some time now. And that's about alternative investment for, governments in Africa. I grew up in a very fragile, environment. Most of my colleagues are still growing up in those situations and circumstances, either post-conflict or countries where access is practically just doesn't exist. Now, in business, money follows the market. Now, for governments in such very fragile post-conflict situations, how can you, talk about alternative use of money, particularly investment? If you say, if you don't, for instance, invest in things that is mainly for private sector, there are some countries, a good number of countries in Africa, they don't even have the market to attract. There's no private sector. The foreign investors don't even want to come there. So what are the options, for such countries? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fidel. Next question, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sunday Leonard, and I'm with the United Nations Environment Program, the North American office, not far away from here. And thanks very well for the presentation and the book. I've not read the book also, so some of my comments might sound novice, or it might be that you've addressed them in the book. But one of the first points I wanted to make is, so you focus on financial sustainability of electricity access in Africa, and I just think we must go beyond financial sustainability and look at sustainability in the broad context. So it's the environmental sustainability, is the economic sustainability, and social sustainability. The three pillars has to be addressed. So, and if we approach our solutions addressing those three pillars, then the question that Rose needed to answer will not be needed, because you would have done the analysis to make sure that whatever type of electricity we are trying to produce in Africa does not necessarily come back to haunt us. So it's not just the fact that Africa is small in the greenhouse gas discussion and you need to reduce the amount of, and you know that even if we use coal, it's not going to affect us, but it's the fact that there's the feedback that if we generate poor type of electricity at this stage, then we are reducing our resilience to the impact of climate change. So I think that needs to be addressed and look at holistically when discussing these kind of issues. And then you also talk about the supply side, that even if you give some people electricity, they are not ready to use it. And I think we need to approach these things in an integrated manner. We need an integrated approach that looks at the people we want to give electricity, what is their financial status? How do we build them to be productive in the first place? So as you are giving electricity, you're also building the productivity of the people. Then you are creating that cycle that actually addresses all the different issues. And I think there is also the other demand side that needs to be looked at. I don't know if our Nigerian colleague is here. I'm Nigerian also. And in Nigeria, we still have a lot of people that have money to pay for electricity and they can't get that. You might argue with me, but people buy generators. It is more expensive to run generators in Nigeria than to pay for electricity. But people buy generator. You have air pollution everywhere. But because you can't get the type of electricity you need, you have to take what you have.
It's the reliability issue that was mentioned. And Sunday, it's like you've read the book, actually. but I'll let Musa, elaborate on that, because all the issues you mentioned are exactly what the book is dealing with. Is there any third question in the room, please? Please. How about the right side? The right side cannot be the weak side, right? Please, please. Come to the mic, please.
Thank you. My name is Tarsisia Muremye, consultant at the World Bank. My question is directed to Musa. I think the issue is very critical, but I'm wondering if you are not analyzing the function of production. Because, for example, in a country when we have a potential in the mining sector, and we see that we don't have enough electricity for this sector. So how you will address this electricity access to household? Because the problem is the income. And the only way to increase household income is to have a work. So my question is, if you are not focused on the function of production, how you will address the household's access to energy, because the problem is the low income. My second question is on electricity subsidy. Would you advise the government continuing the subsidy of energy, electricity? What is the implication on the supply of electricity? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarsis. I think I'm going to stop here for now. Get the panel, get some answers from the panel, and if we have some little time left, we'll go for additional burning questions. So let me open to the panel. Should we start from the right to the left? Musa?
Yeah, so I'm going to be quick. I think we will not have time for another round. We were told that we need to vacate by 5.
By 5, okay.
Yeah. Just very quickly on the first questions that were addressed to me, the second part of the question is really like Albert said, the center of the issues that we are dealing with in the book, and I'm happy to discuss with you in person later on. On the first part of your question, we also agree. That's very, very important, right? But there is a balance to be struck in there. So we do cover this in the book, not extensively, because we think it's an important issue, but we think this is more elaborated within the context of the analysis of the supply. But what we say in the book is that the assumptions behind the energy mix that is needed for our countries need to be transparent. It shouldn't be a black box that comes out and just say, you need to go green 100% or 20%, etc. We need to know clearly that behind any of these recommendations, you have trade-offs, and those trade-offs, who need to choose those trade-offs, we need to be transparent about everything, and we think the government should be leading the charge in deciding how much environment versus job now versus job in the future. Those choices are really the choices that are guiding the energy mix, but that's not the center of the book as we wrote it. Now, the second question, I believe the first part of the second question is really, we are in agreement there that the production function is really central. That's what we're saying, but we're saying that that is needed even more in this context where if not, we're not going to get sustainability. The second question about the subsidies, I think there's a number of studies that have shown some of the inefficiencies that come with these subsidies, some of the problems, especially the distributional effect of these subsidies. But what we really short on is the political dimension of it, how to address it. And we've seen countries nearly collapse when they try to address this issue. The last one that we have as an example is Haiti, where they cut the subsidies, and within days there were people dead, a lot of loss, damage, and they had to roll back, and then the people were asking even the government to leave. So we need more.
I guess it wasn't the World Bank recommendation.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say whose recommendation that was, but yeah. So we know of the issue. We know less about how to do it, and the governments also know less on how to do it, and we need more knowledge on that front.
Thank you very much, Musa. I'm going to ask the rest of the panel to stick to 1 minute and give your closing remark as well, because we are, tight on time. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so just on the subsidy issue, I would say I like to distinguish between African countries where power is relatively cheap or relatively cost-effective, I should say, and those where it's extremely expensive. Countries that are under about 15 cents a kilowatt hour probably could move towards cost-reflective pricing without too much of a social impact. But unfortunately, that doesn't cover all of Africa. There are plenty of countries where it's genuinely much more expensive, and there you do have to think about affordability issues. Okay. On the issue of the fragile states and the public funding for energy, I just wanted to mention that one of the solutions that we're actively working on is regional trade for fragile states. There's a lot of examples of small fragile states in West Africa that really, would be a misuse of public funds to invest in very expensive domestic generation when they can import from countries that have much more of a comparative advantage in power generation. So I think there are ways of economizing on public funds even there. Thank you.
Excellent. So, can you, Rose, can you tell us your takeaway and answer any question that came?
So I think that, Musa, you did a good job discussing balancing sustainability and all of these other factors. So I think I'll just respond to one of the comments about reliability. I think it was in the Nigerian context. And for me, one thing that has been helpful is to reflect back, not just on everything that is problematic, but all the progress that has been made. In Kenya in the 90s, when I was growing up, we had extreme load shedding, extreme unreliability. It was a very, very difficult our power sector was basically falling apart, and just the sheer improvement is really dramatic. And so I think that those success stories are worth looking at as we kind of chart a path forward.
Absolutely. And KenGen is actually one of the better managed utilities in Africa. And a year ago, we actually invited Rebecca, the CEO of KenGen, on the panel of the State of the Africa region here in the World Bank. So yes, a lot of progress.
We have a woman sitting on top of a...
Absolutely.
It's one of the only ones, I think.
We need more.
We need more, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So just our colleague from UNEP made an excellent point on resilience to climate change. If we think about the impacts of climate change on Sub-Saharan Africa, what's it going to mean? It's going to mean more extreme weather, drought, declining water tables, and rising temperatures. So what does Africa need to deal with that? Well, with more extreme weather, you're going to need seawalls and safe buildings and hardened infrastructure. That means steel and concrete. Steel and concrete require a lot of energy. Rising drought, declining water tables, you need pumped irrigation for agriculture. Some countries are going to need desalination. Desalination requires a ton of energy. And rising temperatures, it's going to mean cold storage and air conditioning. There's already parts of India where you cannot work indoors without air conditioning. There are going to be parts of Africa where you're not going to be able to work indoors without air conditioning. So the realities of climate change mean that Africa needs more energy, not less. So I'll just end on that.
Excellent. That sounds like the word of closing, but it wouldn't be complete, until together we give a great round of applause to this great panel. So I'd like to congratulate Musa, Malcolm, and the rest of the team for an excellent contribution to this literature, but also to this policy discussion, which is actually so important for our countries. And we really wish that, the discussion in this book really translates into concrete policy actions in each and every single African country. And that by the time we discuss the next report, that electricity access is no longer an issue to be discussed in such a forum. So with this, I would really like to thank you for coming, and good luck to the book. Thank you.
We're going to do, Musa, you're going to do a picture?
Yes, let's have
Musa, let's do a photo, eh?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Is that okay?
Malcolm, let's have
Right? Oh, wait, Musa, you have to hold this up. Oh, okay. All right.